I'll try to tackle two issues. First of all, I'd like to give you my own experience as a journalist covering International Geneva during the COVID-19 and the impact it might have in the future. And a second point I'd like to tackle is I'd like to make an analysis of the situation of multilateralism in the age of COVID-19 in the light of what happened in the last weeks. So maybe to start with, as far as a journalist, what was it like to cover International Geneva? It was under the confinement and COVID-19. Well, I think it was an exciting experience to go to attend press conferences through Zoom or whatever means. And but obviously, it doesn't replace, as Ambassador Flores Liera was saying, we are doing basically the same kind of job as diplomats, and we need informal meetings, as Stéphane was saying, in coffee shops, in lobbies of the Palais des Nations or whatever. And that's very important to try to understand what's going on behind the scenes, And for me, as Alexandre was basically saying, we need some kind of hybrid way of functioning. I think the International Geneva ecosystem needs some kind of physical presence, obviously, because as the ambassador was saying, we need this informal meeting. On the other hand, since Geneva wants to be the hub of international governance, I think we need to strike the right balance between physical presence and digital. That said, as Beatrice was saying just before, what's very important, I think, from my journalistic point of view, is that we can really do our job. And Beatrice highlighted a very important point: trust. People need trust in institutions and things like that. And obviously, trust can be built also by exercising, criticism towards institutions and things like that. And I think that's very important, that we are able to exercise our job. And as I said, to do it, I think informal meetings are vital, because it helps us understand really better what's behind the scenes. Press conferences help us cover very important issues that are in the news. But on the other hand, if you want to go behind the scene and try to find new stories that don't come up to the surface, I think you really need those kind of informal meetings. And the 3,000 conferences we have here in Geneva are very helpful, because you have so many delegates coming over to Geneva, over 10,000, and I think so we have so many brains you can benefit from, and I think that's important. Now, shifting to multilateralism and the crisis, as it has been said already, COVID-19 has exacerbated, obviously, the multilateral crisis. And I think WHO was a very focal point of that. We saw a very violent geopolitical confrontation between the US and China. And I think my worries about International Geneva here is that this confrontation might be very detrimental to the Geneva ecosystem, in the sense that obviously, if, for example, the US pulls out of WHO, as it is threatening to do, it would take some legitimacy to the organization, even though China might compensate some part of the funding and things like that. But, the US has been a major actor in building up this international system. If it pulls out of different organizations like the Human Rights Council, UNESCO, and maybe tomorrow WHO, it might be very detrimental. And it's in this discussion, it's interesting because we were talking about a new definition of multilateralism when President Xi Jinping from China came to Geneva in January 2017, and he held a very memorable speech saying that, he was basically buttressing all the liberal values of the international system. And we thought here, that's a redefinition of multilateralism. And I do think we have to reinvent multilateralism by including much more civil society, informal actors, and things like that. Because what we see now, and that's where I'm very worried about, is that the intergovernmental relation are not going to be any easier in the coming years. And I think the redefinition of, because China obviously is investing a lot of energy in international organization. We could see that through the last election of the WIPO director. China wanted to get elected the fifth kind of Chinese representative at the top of UN agency, and that worried a lot of people because they were saying, oh, maybe they're playing with a heavy hand here, and their way of working didn't work. So I'm a little bit worried about this confrontation between the US and China. We could see it already at the Security Council, which has been totally absent basically during this COVID-19 crisis, but in Geneva might be affected by that as well. Now what I see here is that obviously International Geneva has to be, as it has already been said, much more inclusive and things like that. It means that China must be also a major actor, but it must be totally included in the, and that's what basically Angela Merkel was saying 2 days ago in Germany, that we can't afford not to cooperate with China. Now, in the light of the receding kind of multilateralism, obviously one of the main worries is that it's a question of funding. For example, a lot of international organizations will go through very tough times in terms of funding. That's why what was announced yesterday with creation of a WHO foundation to support financially a very underfinanced WHO is quite interesting, and that's maybe one of these most encouraging ways of reinventing International Geneva by resorting to non-traditional way of financing and things like that. And I think that's very promising, and that's about it. And maybe just to conclude, Alexandre was talking about this notion of soft laws, with International Geneva might be more flexible in terms of using soft and hard mechanisms, even though it might be also a double sword weapon in the sense, I remember the whole conversation we had about the Migration Pact, and it's a soft law agreement. But it set off so many reactions in the Swiss parliament that they were so afraid of soft laws that actually Switzerland ended up not attending the conference that adopted formally this pact in Marrakesh. I think I'll conclude with this. Thank you.